Welcome to the Worcestershire Soldier Gallery. The highlights of the Worcestershire Regiment and Worcestershire Yeomanry Museum collections were on display at Worcester City Art Gallery and Museum until September 2025. The gallery told the story of the infantry and cavalry of Worcestershire from 1694 to the present day. These soldiers lived and sometimes died in the defence of the country and its interests overseas. In 1694, Colonel Thomas Farrington raised a regiment for the King. It later became known as the 29th Foot and eventually merged with the 36th Herefordshire Regiment to become the Worcestershire Regiment. From the mid-18th century, the 29th Regiment spent a considerable time in North America. They helped establish the settlement of Halifax, Nova Scotia, and fought throughout the American War of Independence. With the regular troops fighting abroad, the Worcestershire Militia was re-established at home. It had existed in some form since Saxon times and was made up of residents who could be called upon to defend the county against invasion. The uniform here dates from around 1800. The soldiers who served in the 29th Regiment did not all come from Worcestershire. Many came from Ireland, America or Canada, where the regiment served. Between 1759 and 1843, over 40 black men served as drummers in the 29th, one of whom was John Freeman from Antigua. This Military General Service Medal shows that Freeman fought in some of the toughest battles of the Peninsular War. Following the French Revolution, and with the threat of invasion by Napoleonic forces, the militia was embodied from 1793 to 1816. It was bolstered additionally by new patriotic local volunteer forces. Their badges demonstrate their links to Worcester through emblems associated with the city.
The Worcestershire Yeomanry was formed in 1794 to counter a possible invasion by Napoleon Bonaparte, who, at that time, was stomping around Europe. Local dignitaries were asked to fund the formation of a force and, with the government's backing and additional funding, several troops were raised in the county. The uniforms in this case highlight the colourful period of British Army uniforms prior to the introduction of khaki. The yeomanry was, and is still, made up entirely of volunteers, and not until 1900 and the Boer War were they required to serve overseas. A guidon is the colour of a yeomanry or cavalry regiment. When the Worcestershire Yeomanry was reformed in 1831, it required a new guidon. This was embroidered in silken thread on a silk background and was carried by a junior officer, usually a cornet, and accompanied by a guard of senior NCOs when on parade.
Colours are important emblems of regimental identity. They are presented by the sovereign and bear the battle honours awarded to the regiment. These colours show the names of battles in which the Worcestershire Regiment fought with distinction. In the early 19th century, both the 36th and 29th Regiments were deployed to fight the French in Spain and Portugal in what became known as the Peninsular War. The 29th won its first battle honour at the Battle of Rolica in 1808. It was there that it lost its commanding officer, George Lake, whose relics and gold medal can be seen here. Shortly afterwards, Wellington praised the regiment as the best in the army. However, it was decimated at the Battle of Albuera in 1811. In this battle, Ensigns Edward Furness and Richard Vance, the young officers carrying the colours, were killed defending them from the enemy and became regimental heroes. Under the leadership of William Cross, whose coat and gold medals are also displayed here, the 36th Regiment pursued the French army right into France and took part in the final battle of the war at Toulouse in 1814. These paintings show officers of the 29th and 36th Regiments at the time of the Peninsular War. The 29th officer is Captain Charles Davy. He became a clergyman after returning from the war and is buried in Malvern Priory. In the mid-19th century, the the 29th Regiment fought in the Anglo-Sikh Wars. The Sikh army was formidable, and conditions were tough. The regiment suffered many casualties and struggled with a lack of clean drinking water. You can see the type of water bottle they carried in this case. The Sikh jacket, also shown here, was taken at Worcestershire, where the Sikh camp was overrun. It is a remarkable survival from this time. Even beyond the battlefield, life in the army was hard. Discipline was brutal, and flogging was not abolished until 1881. Drunkenness was also a major problem, and in the 19th century efforts were made to divert men away from drink and into temperance associations and other pastimes. The medals here were awarded for abstaining from alcohol. This medal cabinet contains military general service medals from 1789 to 1814, which were awarded for service in the Napoleonic Wars. The MGSM was the first medal to be awarded to all ranks, but recipients had to survive until 1848 when the medal was issued to be eligible. The clasps show the battles in which the men fought. You can also see medals here for service in the Punjab and Sutlej campaigns of the Anglo-Sikh Wars. In the 1850s, there was again fear of French invasion, as new local defence forces were hastily raised. These included the Rifle and Artillery Volunteers. Both forces drew in educated middle-class men working in local trade and industry, who met regularly to train and socialise. In 1881, the Worcestershire Regiment was formed, and the Rifle Volunteers became the 1st and 2nd Volunteer Battalions. The Worcestershire Artillery Volunteers were formed in 1864 and had their headquarters in Worcester. Their successor unit, 214 Battery of 104 Regiment Royal Artillery, are the only current serving units still stationed in the city. Until the early 1800s, soldiers had been billeted in taverns. Later, a soldier's life revolved around the barrack room. He ate, relaxed, and spent hours cleaning his uniform and equipment there. The officers of the regiment lived a very different life to common soldiers, and their messes often reflected the middle and upper class homes from which they came. This included silver flatware and presentation pieces given by officers to the mess, usually at the end of their career. Here we can see the Ennis Cup presented by Lieutenant Colonel John Ennis of the 29th Regiment, and the Spratt Bowl presented by Lieutenant Colonel Spratt. The Worcestershire Regiment fought in South Africa from 1899 to 1902. The regular battalions were joined by detachments from the Yeomanry and the Volunteers, which was the first time either had served overseas. In South Africa, tactics and uniform had to adapt to new conditions, and khaki was worn for the first time by British soldiers. Supply of food and clean drinking water remained a challenge, and battlefield casualties were far outweighed by deaths from sickness. In this case, you can see the emergency rations issued to troops.
The yeomanry responded very well to the call to arms at the outbreak of the Great War and mobilised within 7 days. They were first required to travel to Egypt and then to Gallipoli. Following the disastrous Gallipoli campaign, the regiment returned to Egypt and was stationed to guard the access to the Suez Canal. At Katia and Ogratina, the regiment was decimated and over 100 troops killed and many taken prisoner by the Turks, including the first infidels to be paraded through Jerusalem since the Crusades. Later they would have their day at Hujj, when the regiment became the very last British cavalry unit to make an unsupported cavalry charge against guns manned by Austrian and Turkish troops. They remained in Egypt, Palestine and Mesopotamia throughout the war, returning home in 1919.
In World War I, the Worcestershire Regiment expanded to 22 battalions and served in all major theatres, from France and Flanders to Turkey and Mesopotamia. Over 130,000 men served in the regiment during the war. Of these, nearly 10,000 were killed, and countless more were wounded. In this case, you can see the uniform worn by soldiers and officers at the outbreak of war, and after 1916, when the soft forage cap was replaced with a steel helmet to provide some defence against sniping and the use of high explosive shells. You can also see the body armour introduced to protect men from these changing methods of warfare. Lieutenant Colonel Woodhouse was a pre-war regular officer who by 1914 had risen to command of the 1st Battalion of the regiment. He was killed leading his battalion at the Battle of Neuve-Chapelle. During World War I, the men of the Worcestershire Regiment won a total of 9 Victoria Crosses, the highest military honour awarded for gallantry in the presence of the enemy. Herbert James, a junior officer, won the regiment's first VC in Gallipoli for defending a trench alone and armed only with hand grenades. Private Turrell won the same award on the Western Front for his selfless efforts to save a wounded officer. General Grogan was a pre-war regular. He took command of the 1st Battalion in 1915 and won the VC for his leadership during the last major German offensive of World War I. This sculpture by Charles Jagger, who served in the Worcestershire Regiment, is a model for The Sentry, a war memorial in the Piccadilly Hotel, Manchester. Jagger sculpted some of the best-known war memorials in the country, including those in Hyde Park and in Paddington Station. After World War I, the Worcestershire Regiment was reduced to 2 regular battalions, who served on garrison duty at tumultuous times in locations including Ireland, Palestine and China. In World War II, the Worcestershire Regiment fought across the globe. The 7th and 8th Battalions went with the British Expeditionary Force to France and were evacuated from Dunkirk. The 1st Battalion fought in North Africa, where most of its men were captured after becoming trapped at Tobruk in 1942. The reformed battalion landed in Normandy in June 1944 and fought through northwest Europe, becoming some of the first British troops on German soil. In the east, soldiers of the 2nd and 7th Battalions fought the Japanese army in Burma. This pastel portrait is of Private Hunt, who won a Distinguished Conduct Medal at Tobruk. He was one of the few members of the 1st Battalion who evaded capture. In this cabinet you can see medals awarded to men of the Worcestershire Regiment, including those of General Gale, who fought with the Worcestershire Regiment in World War I, but went on to command the Airborne Division on D-Day.
The Yeomanry, having been converted to Royal Artillery in 1922, was sent to France at the start of the war as part of the British Expeditionary Force, the BEF. Evacuated from Dunkirk, they continued their role as anti-tank gunners until they were converted to airborne gunners in 1943. The Yeomanry landed on D-Day by glider to a flank of Pegasus Bridge, and thereafter fought their way through France and Germany, taking part in the Battle of the Bulge, Operation Varsity, the crossing of the Rhine, and then onto the Baltic, meeting up with Russian forces on the 8th of May 1945. The Yeomanry were dispatched to Palestine in 1945 to act as a police force to assist in maintaining the peace between Arabs and Jews. They were to remain in theatre until 1948, and it was in this year that the Territorial Army was reformed in the UK, and the Worcestershire Yeomanry returned to its cavalry roots by moving back to the Royal Armoured Corps and being equipped with tanks. An amalgamation in 1956 led to the disbandment of the regiment when it became a squadron in a newly formed regiment, the Queen's Own Warwickshire and Worcestershire Yeomanry, with Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II as Honorary Colonel. There are two successor squadrons, one serving in the Royal Yeomanry and the second in the Royal Corps of Signals.
For the Worcestershire Regiment, peace was short-lived, and from 1950 it was fighting again in the Malayan emergency. The green uniform in this case was worn in jungle warfare. The regiment later returned to peacekeeping operations in Cyprus, and here you can also see a blue UN beret worn at this time. The silver drum seen here was presented to the regiment along with the grant of freedom of the city of Worcester in 1950. The troops sent to Malaya included many who were completing their national service. National service was compulsory for all men over the age of 18 until 1961, and many completed their basic training at Norton Barracks before serving with the Worcestershire Regiment. In 1970, the Worcestershire Regiment amalgamated to form the 1st Battalion of the Worcestershire and Sherwood Foresters Regiment. WFR, as it was known, completed numerous tours of Northern Ireland during the Troubles, as well as serving in peacekeeping roles in Cyprus and Bosnia. The uniform in this case was worn in Northern Ireland on Operation Banner. This was the longest continuous deployment in British military history. The desert camouflage uniform in this case was worn while fighting the Taliban in Afghanistan. You will see here the Osprey body armour issued to protect troops from the increased use of improvised explosive devices. While serving in Afghanistan, WFR amalgamated again, becoming the 2nd Battalion of the Mercian Regiment in 2007. The Mercian Regiment continues to exist today, although 2nd Battalion has since been disbanded. From 2024, the National Lottery Heritage Fund has funded the development of a new regimental display at the Commandery in Worcester. The Regimental Museum trustees would like to thank the city for hosting the Worcestershire Soldier Gallery for over 50 years and giving the people of Worcester free access to their military heritage in the heart of the city. Please visit our website to learn more about the regiments and those who served in them.